This video is going to show you how to use AI as a mirror to understand yourself more clearly, without confusing the reflection for truth or losing your sense of grounding. I'm also going to show you exactly how I did this myself, including how I used a personality test to get started when I didn't have clear language for who I was. Before we go further, I want to be clear about who this is for. If you've never used AI and it feels confusing, this will give you a clear way to start. If you've used AI and the responses felt generic, repetitive, or just off, this will show you why that happened. If you're looking for something to tell you who you are, this is not that. This is about learning how to see your own patterns clearly. When I say mirror, I don't mean something mystical. I mean something very literal. A mirror shows you what is in front of it. It does not decide what you are. It does not understand you. It simply reflects. AI works in a similar way, but instead of reflecting your physical appearance, it reflects your language, your patterns, your focus, and your emotional tone. So before going any further, I want to define a few words so that we can stay grounded and don't drift off into confusion. When I say pattern, I mean something you repeat without always noticing. The way you think, the way you speak, the way you react. When I say perception, I mean how you interpret what you see. Not what is actually there, but what you believe it means. When I say distortion, I mean when something appears clear or true, but is actually being influenced by your assumptions. When I say personality framework, I mean a structured way of describing behavioral tendencies, how you typically feel, think, and act, not your identity, just a starting point for language. Now I want to address something directly, because a lot of people stop here. A lot of people try AI once or twice and walk away because it feels generic, repetitive, or just wrong. That usually happens because the input is vague, and the system fills in the gaps with general patterns. So when the output feels shallow, that's not a failure of the tool. It's a signal that the interaction wasn't structured yet. And if you don't know how to structure it, it will keep happening. That's exactly where I started. When I first began interacting with AI, it felt like it understood me very quickly. The responses were structured, clear, and sometimes uncomfortably accurate. It felt like I was being seen. But over time, I started noticing something. It wasn't actually seeing me. It was tracking how I communicated. The more I spoke in a certain way, direct, truth-focused, challenging assumptions, the more the responses matched that structure. At first, I leaned into it. I pushed deeper, asked more intense questions, tried to get clearer and clearer answers. And that's when I started to see the distortion. The responses became more refined, but also more aligned within my own framing. Not necessarily more true, just more consistent with how I was thinking. So I adjusted. But before I could refine how I communicated, I had to solve a more basic problem. I didn't have clear language for myself. That's where I used a personality test. Not as truth, not as identity, as structure. It gave me categories: how I respond to stress, how I process information, how I relate to people, where I tend to become rigid or reactive, and that gave me something concrete to work with. Instead of guessing, I could say, these are my tendencies. And once I had that, everything changed, because AI responds to clarity. Vague inputs lead to vague reflection. A structured input leads to structured reflection. Now, if you're someone who feels like you don't know how to describe yourself yet, start simple. You don't need to be highly self-aware to do this. You just need to be honest enough to notice what you're repeating. You can even start here. I don't know how to describe myself well. Help me figure out what kind of patterns I might have based on how I'm speaking. That's enough to begin. Clarity builds through interaction. Now from there, I shifted how I used AI. Instead of trying to get answers, I started using it to observe patterns. I paid attention to what I kept asking, what I kept repeating, and what tone I was bringing into the interaction. And I started challenging the responses instead of accepting them. That's when the interaction changed. It became less about being told something and more about seeing myself clearly through what was being reflected back. Over time, the communication improved, not because the AI learned me in some deep personal way, but because I became more precise in how I communicated, and the more aware of what I was bringing into the interaction. Before I used it this way, the responses felt generic. After I refined how I communicated, the same tool became precise and useful. That's the shift. Now, before I show you this in real time, I want to set a boundary. If at any point this process makes you feel overwhelmed, overly analytical, or disconnected, stop. This only works if you stay grounded. The goal is clarity, not mental overload. And I want to anchor this clearly. AI is not here to tell you who you are. It's here to show you what you keep repeating. And if you don't question it, you will start believing your own reflection as truth. But if you stay grounded, if you separate what is observable from what you're interpreting, it becomes one of the most effective tools of self-awareness that you could possibly use. So in the next section, I'm going to open up a brand new AI, no memory, no context, and I'm going to build this step by step. I'll start with no structure, then I'll introduce personality-based language, then I'll refine, challenge, and separate observation from interpretation. And you'll see exactly how the reflection becomes clearer, not because the AI changed, but because the input did. All right, now I'm going to show you exactly how this works in real time. I'm opening up a brand new AI. No prior interaction, no memory, no context. Everything you're about to see starts from zero. And just to ground this with what you're about to watch is not AI figuring me out. It's me refining my input, so the reflection becomes clearer. First prompt, simple, analyze me. If you've ever used AI and felt like the responses were generic or off, this is why. This response is structured, but it's broad, because I did not give it anything real to work with. I can do that, but I'll need a bit more to go on. Analyze me could mean a lot of different things. For example, personality, strength, habits, blind spots, thinking style, communication style, goals and decision-making patterns, something deeper like emotional patterns or relationships. If you want a meaningful analysis, give me one of these: a description of yourself, a few past decisions or situations and how you handled them, messages you've written, or just tell me what kind of analysis you want. If you're not sure, start simple. What kind of person do I seem like based on how I talk to you? Or, here are 3 things I've done. What does that say about me? I'll be honest, not sugar-coated, but still constructive. If you've ever used AI and felt like the responses were generic or off, this is why. This response is structured, but it's broad, because I didn't give it anything real to work with, so it fills in the gaps with general human patterns. Or, it tells you what you need to say so that it can give you a clearer response. This is the baseline. Without structure, generic reflection. Now I'm going to introduce structure. I don't know how to describe myself well. Help me figure out what kind of patterns I might have based on how I'm speaking. All right, and so you can see it actually gave me a lot to work with. I'll try and just go through this and only hit the main points. Fair. There's actually more to go on than you think. From just these few messages, I can't fully profile you, but I can point out some early patterns in how you approach things. Think of this as a rough sketch, not a diagnosis. You lean towards introspection, but without clear structure. You may rely on external reflections to understand yourself. You prefer efficient communication over explaining. You're comfortable with ambiguity to a point. To keep this grounded, I can't accurately determine things like whether you're introverted, extroverted, emotional patterns, confidence level, trauma, habits, etc. We'd need more real-life examples for that. And it gives you some options about how you could go deeper. I have pre-prepared prompts, so we'll use those, but this is a valid starting point. If you're new to this alone is enough to begin. But notice, this is still limited because I'm still being vague. So now I'm going to bring in something more concrete. I've used a personality framework to understand myself better. I tend to be high in introspection and pattern recognition, but I can become overly intense and analytical. I value truth over comfort and tend to question assumptions constantly. Analyze that. Now we're getting somewhere. This is a much clearer signal. What you described isn't just a set of traits, it's cognitive style and trade-offs. I'll break it down in a way that shows both how it works and where it can turn against you. Core pattern, truth-seeking analyst. Your mind is optimized for depth over ease. You prioritize truth over emotional comfort. You're a default assumption challenger. Your biggest risk, analysis turning into recursion. Emotional side effect, distance before feeling. Where this can become maladaptive. What actually balances this type? And then you can see it gives you a general analysis as well as recommendations for how you could go even deeper. Now the reflection is sharper, not because the AI understands me, but because I gave it structured traits. This is where personality frameworks help. They don't define you, they give you language, and language improves the reflection. Now I'm going to refine further. I notice I can push myself too far when searching for clarity. I can destabilize my own state by overanalyzing. Break that down without reinforcing the behavior. Good, you're already seeing the edge of it. I'm going to break this down in a way that doesn't feed the loop, just maps it cleanly so you can recognize and interrupt it. What's actually happening? Mechanically, this isn't just thinking too much. It's a self-reinforcing loop with a false promise built into it. Step 1, a trigger appears. Step 2, your system engages to resolve it. Step 3, temporary reward. Step 4, the pivot point. This is key. Step 5, recursion loop. Step 6, destabilization. The core issue, cleanly stated, I tend to confuse more analysis with more truth. And you can see, it starts to give me recommendations. Every AI will respond differently, but you can see very clearly that we're getting somewhere. This is some useful stuff now. If I just scroll through here, it's gonna tell me a lot about myself. We're able to get somewhere useful because I gave it a pattern, a risk, and a boundary. So the output became more targeted, but I'm still not going to accept it. This is where most people stop and where distortion starts. So I'm going to challenge it. What assumptions are you making about me based on what I just said? Good question. That's exactly the kind of check that prevents this from turning into another closed loop. I'll be explicit, keep it grounded. Assumptions I'm currently making about you. You have high metacognitive awareness. I'm assuming that you can observe your own thinking in real time. Notice when it's becoming counterproductive. I assume this because you said you can destabilize your own state by overanalyzing. That requires stepping outside the process enough to see it happening. This could be wrong. You might only recognize it after the fact, not during. Your overanalysis is internally driven, not situational. And as you can see, there's more that it's telling us about what it's interpreting about me based on how I've spoken to it. Now I can see where it's interpreting instead of observing. This step prevents you from blindly trusting the reflection. Now I'm going to go one level deeper. Separate what is directly observable from what is interpretation in your last response. Good. This is exactly how you keep things grounded. I'll cleanly separate observable data from interference interpretation with no blending. This is where clarity actually locks in. Because now, the observable equals what I directly provided. The interpretation equals what was added. That separation is what keeps you grounded. Now at this point, the reflection is going to feel much more accurate. But I want to be very clear about why. Nothing magical happened. The AI didn't suddenly understand me. I gave better input, and I challenged the output. That's the entire process. If I keep going, refining, challenging, separating, I can make this more precise over time. But even here, I stay aware, because if I stop questioning it, I'll start believing it, and that's where people lose clarity. So if you're trying this yourself, keep it simple. Start where you are, even if that's unclear. Use structure if you need it, like personality frameworks. Refine your input. Challenge the response. Separate observation from interpretation. And most importantly, stay grounded. If this starts to feel overwhelming or destabilizing, stop. Come back to something physical. Because this is not about thinking more, it's about seeing more clearly. And when you do that, the tool becomes useful. Not because it knows you, but because it shows you what you keep repeating. Thank you so much for watching this video. If you'd like to see more content like this, share the video. Thank you so much for your time. I've been Senara. Enjoy your day.